In 1975, before the Next Teardrop Falls did something unprecedented, it took a Mexican-American artist to #1 on both the country and pop charts simultaneously. The song that made Freddy Fender a star wasn't just another country hit. It was a bilingual performance that would change the sound of Nashville forever. This is the story of how 3 minutes of English and Spanish verses transformed American music. The year was 1974, and country music had rules, unwritten but understood by everyone in Nashville. The genre that prided itself on telling authentic American stories somehow had a narrow view of what American meant. The Grand Ole Opry stage, country radio, and the Billboard charts were dominated by one particular sound, one particular look, and most definitely, one particular language. For a Mexican-American artist like Freddy Fender, born Baldemar Huerta in San Benito, Texas, these barriers weren't just professional, they were personal. He'd already spent years building a following along the Texas-Mexico border, earning the nickname El Bebop Kid for his Spanish-language rock and roll covers in the late 1950s. But Nashville? That was a different world entirely. The industry wasn't completely closed to Latin influences. Marty Robbins had scored huge hits with El Paso and Devil Woman. But there was a crucial difference. Those songs were performed by an established white artist, singing primarily in English, using Spanish themes as exotic flavoring. No major country artist had ever dared to sing verses in Spanish, let alone make it a central part of their identity. By 1974, Fender had already lived several musical lives. He'd served in the Marines, spent nearly 3 years in Angola prison on marijuana charges, and recorded countless singles for small labels across Texas. His voice, that distinctive, trembling tenor that could convey heartbreak in any language, was already legendary in Texas dance halls. But the mainstream industry saw him as too Mexican for country and too country for the Latin market. This was the reality of American music in the mid-70s. While rock and roll had begun embracing cultural fusion, country music remained resistant to change. The very idea of a bilingual country song seemed absurd to industry executives. Radio programmers openly questioned whether their audiences would tolerate Spanish lyrics during prime listening hours. Then came a chance encounter that would change everything. Producer Huey P. Moe, known as the Crazy Cajun for his unconventional approaches to recording, heard Fender performing in a small Texas club. Moe had already helped launch several careers, but what he envisioned for Fender was different. He didn't want to strip away Fender's Mexican-American identity to make him fit Nashville's mold. He wanted to use it as a strength, but first they needed the right song. Not just any song, one that could bridge cultures, challenge assumptions, and still be commercial enough for mainstream radio. They found it in a nearly forgotten ballad that had been floating around Nashville for years, turned down by virtually every major artist who'd heard it. What happened next would not only transform Freddy Fender's career, it would challenge everything Nashville thought it knew about country music. The story of Before the Next Teardrop Falls actually begins years before Freddy Fender ever heard it. Written by Vivian Keith and Ben Peters in 1967, the song had already been recorded more than 24 times. Each version followed the same safe formula: straight country, English only, minimal commercial success. The song seemed destined to remain just another forgotten Nashville ballad. But Huey P. Moe saw something different in those lyrics. Having worked with both country and Tejano artists, he understood the power of cultural crossover. More importantly, he recognized that Fender's voice had something none of the previous versions did: the ability to convey raw emotion that transcended language barriers. The recording session itself was deceptively simple. In a small studio in Houston, with basic equipment and a handful of session musicians, Fender laid down the vocal track in just a few takes. The decision to include Spanish verses wasn't part of some grand marketing strategy. It felt natural, authentic to who Fender was as an artist. He translated the second verse himself, maintaining the song's emotional core while adding a cultural dimension that had never been explored in mainstream country music. But when Moe started shopping the record to major labels, the response was unanimous rejection. A Spanish country song? That'll never work. The objections were always the same. Radio wouldn't play it, retailers wouldn't stock it, audiences wouldn't buy it. One executive even suggested re-recording it entirely in English to make it more commercially viable. Moe and Fender stood their ground. They believed in the power of the performance, in the authenticity of presenting Fender as he truly was, a product of both cultures, both languages, both musical traditions. They finally found a home for the song at ABC Records, a smaller label willing to take risks that the major players wouldn't touch. The initial pressing was modest, just a few thousand copies distributed primarily to Texas radio stations. The strategy was to build regional support before attempting any national push. But sometimes the most powerful cultural movements start not with a grand plan, but with a simple, authentic expression that resonates with people in unexpected ways. As those first copies made their way to radio stations in early 1975, something remarkable began to happen. DJs who might have normally skipped over a bilingual song found themselves captivated by Fender's emotional delivery. Listeners who didn't understand Spanish still felt the power of his performance. The song began generating the kind of buzz that no amount of marketing money could buy. What started as a regional curiosity was about to explode into a national phenomenon that would force the entire country music industry to reevaluate its assumptions about what was possible. The first sign that Before the Next Teardrop Falls was different came from an unlikely source: pop radio. While country stations in Texas were already playing the song, it was the pop stations that helped it break out of regional success. By March 1975, the song had entered the Billboard Hot 100. By May, it had achieved what many thought impossible, simultaneously topping both the country and pop charts. The numbers told an extraordinary story. In just 3 months, the song had sold over 1 million copies. ABC Records, previously known mainly for regional releases, suddenly found themselves with a global hit. The same industry executives who had rejected the song were now scrambling to explain how they'd missed such an obvious hit. Fender's television appearances became must-see events. He performed on American Bandstand, The Midnight Special, and Hee Haw, bringing his bilingual country sound to national audiences. Each appearance demonstrated something remarkable. Viewers weren't just tolerating the Spanish verses, they were embracing them. Billboard magazine's review section, typically reserved in its praise, called it one of the most important crossover records of the decade. Radio programmers reported an unexpected phenomenon. English-speaking listeners were calling in to request the Spanish version, even though the song was the same every time. The Spanish verses had become the song's signature element, the very thing that had initially made industry executives nervous. The success created a ripple effect. Wasted Days and Wasted Nights, a song Fender had written during his time in Angola prison, was quickly released as a follow-up. It too shot to #1 on the country charts and crossed over to pop success. By the end of 1975, Fender had charted 4 singles in the country top 10, proving his success wasn't a one-hit wonder. Record sales told only part of the story. Concert promoters, who had previously hesitated to book a Mexican-American act for mainstream country audiences, now found themselves competing for Fender's appearances. His shows regularly sold out, drawing a diverse crowd that crossed cultural and linguistic boundaries. The audience demographic at his concerts, a mix of traditional country fans, Latin music lovers, and pop enthusiasts, represented something new in country music. The Grand Ole Opry invitation came in late 1975, marking a turning point in country music history. On that historic night, Fender performed both his hits, refusing to dilute his bilingual approach for country's most traditional audience. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for the performance, it was an acknowledgement that country music's boundaries were forever changed. Media coverage of Fender's success sparked intense debate within the industry. Rolling Stone magazine ran a feature titled "The Mexican American Who Changed Nashville," highlighting how Fender's success challenged the established order. Billboard dedicated 3 separate cover stories to analyzing the phenomenon, focusing on everything from radio play patterns to retail placement strategies. The numbers kept growing. By August 1975, Before the Next Teardrop Falls had sold 2 million copies worldwide. The album of the same name reached platinum status, a rare achievement for a country record in that era. International markets that had never shown interest in country music were suddenly requesting copies, particularly in Latin America and Europe. Record stores faced an interesting dilemma. Where should they stock Fender's albums? Some created special crossover sections, while others made the bold decision to display the same album in multiple departments. Tower Records in Los Angeles reported selling out of the album in both their country and Latin music sections multiple times. Concert venues told a similar story of transformation. Fender's 1975 tour schedule revealed the breadth of his appeal. One night he'd play a traditional country music festival in Tennessee, the next a Latin music showcase in Texas, followed by a mainstream pop venue in California. Each audience embraced him fully, suggesting that musical barriers were more artificial than real. Radio programmers who had initially relegated the song to off-peak hours found themselves facing mounting listener requests during prime time. Several major market stations reported that Before the Next Teardrop Falls was among their most requested songs across all time slots. The Spanish verses, far from driving listeners away, became a major selling point. By year's end, the statistics were undeniable. 5 consecutive top 10 country hits, 2 #1 pop crossovers, and a platinum album. Fender had achieved what no other artist had done, maintaining complete cultural authenticity while achieving mainstream success. He hadn't changed his style to fit the market had changed to embrace his style. Nashville's initial response to Freddy Fender's success was a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Record labels that had previously dismissed bilingual artists suddenly began actively scouting Latino talent. By early 1976, several major labels had created special divisions focused on what they called crossover country, though few understood what had made Fender's approach work. The ripple effects reached far beyond just signing new artists. Radio stations began revising their long-standing programming policies. The unwritten rule about English-only broadcasting during prime hours started to crumble. Program directors who had feared audience backlash against foreign languages found themselves surprised by listener response. Authenticity, it seemed, mattered more than language. Record producers started experimenting with Latin rhythms and instrumentation in mainstream country recordings. The traditional Nashville sound began incorporating new elements: Spanish guitars, Mexican trumpets, even Tex-Mex accordion. Some attempts were more successful than others, but the rigid boundaries of what constituted country music had been permanently expanded. Marketing departments scrambled to adapt. Album covers that once strived to downplay artists' ethnic backgrounds now celebrated cultural diversity. Press releases highlighted rather than hid multicultural influences. The industry's assumption that the mainstream country audience would reject anything too ethnic had been proven wrong. Concert promoters noticed another significant change. Shows that mixed traditional country acts with Latino performers began drawing larger crowds than single-genre events. The success of these mixed-genre concerts challenged long-held beliefs about audience segregation. Venues that had once restricted Latin music to specific nights or locations now integrated diverse acts into their regular programming. Music publishers, always quick to spot trends, began actively seeking bilingual material. Songs that might have been rejected a year earlier for being too Mexican or not country enough were now given serious consideration. The success of Before the Next Teardrop Falls had created a new category of commercially viable music. The Country Music Association, long considered the guardian of country music's traditions, faced mounting pressure to acknowledge these changes. Their annual awards show, which had historically showcased a narrow view of country music, began featuring more diverse performers. Though they stopped short of creating new categories, the recognition that country music was evolving became impossible to ignore. Music Row Studios adapted their recording techniques to accommodate different styles. Engineers who had specialized in capturing the traditional Nashville sound now studied Mexican recording methods. The goal wasn't to copy Latin music, but to create authentic fusion. Some producers even traveled to Texas border towns, learning from Tejano studio veterans about how to properly record bilingual vocals. Record distribution networks underwent significant restructuring. Albums that would have previously been marketed solely to country or Latin audiences now received dual market promotion. Major retailers like Walmart and Kmart created new display strategies, breaking down the rigid genre segregation that had defined music merchandising for decades. The transformation reached into country music's songwriting community. The prestigious Nashville Songwriters Association began hosting workshops on cross-cultural collaboration. Established country songwriters partnered with Latin musicians, creating new fusion styles that would have been unthinkable before Fender's success. Music industry publications reflected this shift. Billboard magazine introduced new chart categories to better track cross-cultural hits. Record World and Cashbox magazines began regular features on the new country sound. Even conservative trade publications acknowledged that the genre's future would be more diverse than its past. By 1977, the change was evident in the numbers. Latin-influenced country songs had increased 300% on mainstream country radio. Major labels had signed more Hispanic country artists in 2 years than in the previous 2 decades combined. Publishing companies reported a surge in bilingual song submissions. But perhaps the most significant transformation happened in artist development. New artists no longer felt pressured to hide their cultural identities. Johnny Rodriguez, who had been marketed primarily as a traditional country singer despite his Hispanic heritage, began incorporating more Latin elements into his music. Others followed suit, recognizing that authenticity had become a valuable commodity in the new Nashville. The Grand Ole Opry, country music's most conservative institution, found itself at a crossroads. After Fender's successful appearances, they could no longer justify excluding artists based on cultural background. By late 1977, their weekly lineup regularly featured performers from diverse backgrounds, though change came slowly to this Nashville institution. Music education felt the impact too. The country's leading music business schools, including Nashville's Belmont University, began offering courses in cross-cultural music production. Students learned about Latin rhythms alongside traditional country arrangements. The next generation of music industry professionals was being trained to think beyond conventional genre boundaries. Concert venues across the South faced their own challenges. Many had historically maintained unwritten policies about which acts could perform on which nights. Fender's success forced them to confront these discriminatory practices. Venues that adapted prospered. Those that resisted found themselves losing business to more progressive competitors. Radio personalities had to evolve as well. DJs who had struggled with Spanish pronunciation now took pride in getting it right. Station managers provided cultural sensitivity training, recognizing that their audience was more diverse than they'd assumed. The old practice of anglicizing artists' names began to fade. Music festivals underwent similar transformations. Major country events like Fanfare, now CMA Fest, began featuring dedicated stages for cross-cultural acts. The artificial barriers between country and Latin country started dissolving. Audiences moved freely between stages, following the music rather than genre labels. The recording industry's technical side evolved too. Studio equipment catalogs began featuring specialized gear for recording Latin instruments. Engineering schools added courses on multicultural music production. The assumption that all country music should sound the same way was finally breaking down. These changes weren't just reshaping the music business, they were redefining what American music could be. But as Nashville grappled with its new identity, Freddy Fender's influence was about to reach far beyond the borders of country music. Today, when artists like Becky G and Carrie Underwood release Spanish-English duets, or when Latin rhythms blend seamlessly with country twang, they're walking through doors that Freddy Fender kicked open. His impact extends far beyond just making bilingual music acceptable. He fundamentally changed how the American music industry views cultural fusion. Modern country stars like Kane Brown openly discuss their multicultural backgrounds, something unthinkable in the pre-Fender era. The Latin Country Music Association now boasts thousands of members. Major labels actively seek artists who can bridge cultural gaps, recognizing that diversity isn't just socially responsible, it's good business. The streaming era has revealed something Fender knew all along. Music fans don't care about rigid genre boundaries. Playlists regularly mix Spanish and English country songs. Artists like Charlie Garcia and the Mavericks build their entire sound around the cultural fusion Fender pioneered. Their success isn't seen as surprising anymore. It's expected. Music education has permanently changed too. University programs studying country music now include courses on Latin influence in the genre. The Country Music Hall of Fame's curriculum includes extensive coverage of Hispanic contributions to country music, with Fender's breakthrough serving as a crucial turning point. The numbers tell a compelling story. In 2023, Spanish-language country music streams increased by 400% compared to just 5 years ago. Major festivals like Stagecoach and CMA Fest now feature dedicated Latin country showcases. The very concept Fender struggled to sell to record labels, that music could be authentically country and Latin simultaneously, has become a mainstream reality. Radio has undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Stations that once feared playing Spanish verses now actively seek bilingual content. Programs like Latin Country USA and Borderland Beats appear on major country radio networks. Even traditional country stations regularly feature artists performing in multiple languages, treating it as normal rather than novel. The recording industry's approach to marketing has evolved significantly. Labels no longer try to hide artists' cultural backgrounds or force them to choose between identities. Modern artists like Sammy Arriaga and Leah Turner openly celebrate their Hispanic heritage while maintaining their country credentials. The either-or mentality that Fender faced has been replaced by a both-and approach. His influence extends into the business side of music as well. The Billboard Latin Country chart, established in 2021, acknowledges the genre's growing importance. Major agencies now have dedicated divisions for cross-cultural artists. Music Row publishing houses actively seek bilingual songwriters, recognizing the commercial potential Fender first proved possible. The Grammy Awards reflect this evolution. What started with Fender's groundbreaking nominations now includes multiple categories recognizing cultural fusion in country music. The Latin Academy of Country Music Awards, launched in 2022, celebrates the genre's growing diversity while honoring pioneers like Fender, who made it possible. Perhaps most significantly, young artists no longer face the barriers Fender encountered. Record labels actively seek multicultural talent. Production teams include people from diverse backgrounds. The industry infrastructure has finally caught up to what Fender proved nearly 50 years ago, that authentic music transcends cultural and linguistic boundaries. In Nashville's recording studios, Fender's influence shows up in unexpected ways. Modern producers regularly experiment with traditional Mexican instruments, like the bajo sexto and accordion in mainstream country productions. The fear of sounding too ethnic has been replaced by a desire for authentic cultural elements. Artists like Luke Bryan and Blake Shelton have incorporated Latin rhythms into their hits, proving Fender's cross-cultural vision has become industry standard. Music education has evolved dramatically. The Freddy Fender Scholarship Program, established at Berklee College of Music, specifically supports Hispanic students pursuing careers in country music. The Country Music Hall of Fame's educational programs include extensive sections on Latin influence in country music, using Fender's breakthrough as a crucial case study. His impact on songwriting has been equally profound. The Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame now includes several Hispanic members, each citing Fender as an inspiration. Songwriting workshops routinely explore bilingual composition techniques. The very structure of country songs has expanded to accommodate different cultural influences, with publishers actively seeking material that crosses traditional boundaries. Social media has revealed just how prescient Fender's approach was. TikTok and Instagram are filled with young artists performing country music in multiple languages, reaching audiences Fender could only have dreamed of. These platforms have revealed a massive appetite for cultural fusion in country music, with bilingual covers often going viral. Industry veterans who once questioned Fender's approach now acknowledge his foresight. Former executives who passed on before the Next Teardrop Falls regularly speak at music business seminars about the importance of embracing diversity. His story has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting preconceptions limit artistic possibilities. The touring industry particularly reflects his lasting influence. Major country music festivals now feature dedicated Latin country stages. Cross-cultural collaborations are highlighted rather than hidden. The segregated booking practices Fender faced have largely disappeared, replaced by an understanding that diverse lineups draw bigger audiences. Fan demographics tell another important part of Fender's legacy. Country music audiences are more diverse than ever, with Hispanic listeners making up the fastest-growing segment. Industry research shows that stations playing bilingual country music consistently outperform those maintaining traditional format restrictions. The audience Fender helped cultivate has become a powerful market force. Digital streaming platforms have created new ways to measure his ongoing influence. Spotify's Latin Country Pioneers playlist, featuring Fender alongside contemporary artists, regularly tops genre-specific charts. His original recordings find new life through social media, where young listeners discover and share his music, often praising its groundbreaking fusion of styles. The technical side of the industry has permanently changed too. Recording studios now routinely employ engineers skilled in both Nashville and Latin music production techniques. Equipment specifically designed for recording bilingual vocals has become standard in major facilities. The recording process Fender and Huipi Miu pioneered has evolved into established industry practice. Music journalism has shifted its perspective as well. What once would have been covered as novelty stories about Mexican country singers are now treated as mainstream music news. Major publications regularly feature articles about Latin influence in country music, with Fender consistently cited as the catalyst for this evolution. His impact extends into artist development. Record labels now maintain specialized departments for cross-cultural talent development. Artist management firms actively seek bilingual performers. The industry infrastructure has been rebuilt to support the kind of artist Fender had to fight to become. Contemporary artists frequently acknowledge their debt to Fender's pioneering work. During the 2023 CMA Awards, multiple performers paid tribute to his legacy. Young artists like Ali Brooke and Christian Nodal specifically reference him when discussing their own country music crossover attempts. While Freddy Fender's courage opened these doors, his most enduring legacy might be something even more fundamental, proving that authenticity always finds its audience. In 1975, when Before the Next Teardrop Falls first hit the airwaves, few could have predicted its lasting impact. What seemed like just another country song became a cultural watershed moment, challenging assumptions about what country music could be, who could perform it, and how it could sound. Today, when we hear Spanish guitars blend with steel pedals, or watch Hispanic artists accept country music awards, we're witnessing the fulfillment of Freddy Fender's vision. He didn't just create a hit song, he helped create a new musical landscape where cultural authenticity is celebrated rather than suppressed. The barriers he faced haven't completely disappeared. Some radio stations still hesitate to play bilingual songs in prime time. Certain venues still maintain unwritten booking policies. But the difference is that these are now seen as outdated practices rather than industry standards. Perhaps Fender's greatest legacy is the simple truth he proved. Great music transcends language, culture, and industry expectations. His success wasn't despite his Mexican-American identity. It was because he embraced it fully, showing future generations that staying true to yourself is the surest path to lasting impact. If you want to learn more about the pioneers who shaped country music, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on new videos about the legends who made country music what it is today.